Alibongwe. Igama lamakhosikazi. Wathinta abafazi. Wathinta abafazi. Wathinta intombi. Wathinta amantombazana. Because we are not violent, sendiyayibamba loyo kufa kodwa. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here at home. Thank you to CUPT for hosting us, for giving us a home today. Thank you, Mandisa and the board, for all this work and effort and for giving the opportunity to share your achievements, which are inspiring to all of us. Thank you, MEC, for coming all the way from the Eastern Cape and bless us here. And thank you, Prex, for being here. One of our, we are now the veterans. My goodness, we are so old. If Ilitha is 30 years old, we are now the veterans. So thank you for being here, and of course thank you, Anne, who represents UN Women, leads UN Women in South Africa, and our wonderful MC, who just never fails to make an occasion exciting. Thank you so much for using your talent in this manner. I want to thank Ilitha Labantu for the last 30 years. It has been a journey that I've watched because you have been at the forefront of fighting to expose and end violence against women. You started when there was very little support, because you remember in the time when we were fighting against apartheid, ending apartheid was everything. It was like everything else we can sacrifice, including the fact that there was gender inequality and the fact that women were living with violence. This issue was not in the forefront, maybe to some extent gender equality, because we were activists in the liberation movements also fighting for women's struggle, but violence against women was just not at the forefront. And of course there was no support, and there weren't adequate services. The struggle against apartheid was all-consuming. Mandisa Nagali, the founding CEO of Ilitha, knocked at doors of policymakers at the time. She went to her peers, myself included. We were able to go and look for collaborators. The focus was to try and build a community of practice in the fight to protect women. And at that time, we actually did not have the playbook to learn from. Everything that Manisa and the team and the activists that have walked the journey with her, it was things that they had to make up. They were building the train as they were riding it. And of course, the fact that violence against women, especially domestic violence, is so personal was itself a challenge. Mandisa, your resilience and determination has been the foundation for Ilitha's survival, despite a tough funding environment, which I think many of you are sitting here know about. Tough funding environment for civil society and for women's organizations in particular, and especially for organic grassroots organizations. You know, when donors want a perfect proposal, if you are building an organization, you are starting it from scratch, it is even much harder for you to promote yourself. And thank you for having been able to overcome all those challenges. It has been an honor for me to be associated with Ilitha right from its inception and to see it grow and settle in the township of Gugulethu while looking all over the world. Ilitha in that community and beyond has played a unique role. It has been an important instrument for outreach, bringing different and diverse people into the cause, working with religious leaders, working with the police when it was not fashionable to work with the police. That foresight to know that police are public servants, they've got a responsibility to protect, to prevent, and to help to prosecute. Mandisa brought them into the agenda to hold them accountable for the work. And of course, it's been a bottom-up and collaborative approach that Ilitha grasped very early, that we not only have to be an organic grassroots organization that branches out and reaches out to different parts of the world, but also you must be coordinated and focused on a multi-stakeholder approach. These are the efforts you need when you want to build coalitions to fight big battles. And now we've come full swing at a global level. We are trying to build global coalitions in order to fight the stubborn barriers that are in front of us that are stopping us from achieving gender equality. But beyond South Africa's border, Ilitha's participation has been valuable at several events, some of them Ella mentioned, at the Commission of the Status of Women in New York. Ilitha has been there continuously raising the importance of community-driven efforts and practically demonstrating the value of thinking globally and acting local. And at the same time, linking up with other organizations and women's movements around the world in order to make sure that there's an exchange of lessons. So it is truly a privilege for me to be part of this annual inaugural lecture and to celebrate what has been achieved. I know that we are not where we want to be, but we have to take time to encourage each other by making sure that we count our blessings, the small ones and the big ones, one by one. So for us, Mandisa, to you, to the board, and to everybody that works in Ilitha, this is to say thank you for the effort. Manzene Tol. I also feel privileged to have had the association with Ilitha and the fact that Ilitha was based in Gugulethu, where I was a member of parliament. And Ilitha was one of the institutions in my constituency that I could go to in times of need, and there were many times like that. And thank you for waking up any time of the day and night whenever you were called. So today we are also meeting when we have just celebrated Human Rights Day, the 10th of December, as well as ended the 16 days of activism. We end the 16 days of activism, but we are fighting and working for 365 days. Because 16 days is only about a time for us to recharge skokumoya. In 16 days, we expose the challenges, we also share lessons, we mobilize, but we are not saying that this is a fight only for 60 days. This is a fight for 365 days. But sadly, as some of you already mentioned, as we were actively highlighting the challenges during the 16 days, the violence against women did not stop. The atrocities against women have not stopped. In South Africa and in India and in Honduras, during these 16 days, the reports of women being killed in the most gruesome manner have not stopped. What has been particularly worrying to me about us here in South Africa is also seeing that the perpetrators are getting younger and younger. And the violence is getting more and more gruesome. There is something much bigger that we need to do in our engagement in order to get to the bottom of the root causes of this violence and what sustains it. So we are commemorating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as we should, but we are reminding everybody that women's rights are human rights, and human rights are women's rights, because that is what Beijing was about. That is what we took away from Beijing, but unfortunately, it was predominantly us women who took that message to heart. In the next phase, post 30 years of Ilitha, post 25 years of Beijing, we need to make this to be a mantra for everybody. We need to make sure that whatever we achieved in Beijing is taken forward. But whatever we did not achieve in Beijing, we build into the next phase. In Beijing, we also did not celebrate women in their diversity. And we've paid a very high price because we've allowed an environment for homophobia. In this way, we have to make sure that we are inclusive in our approach. In Beijing, also, we did something exceptional, especially as the African women. It was the African women who lobbied for the definition of the girl child. They spent sleepless nights making sure that it's not enough to talk about a child. It's not enough to talk about children. The girl child has special issues that affect her. And it was because of that lobbying and the work of the African women that child marriage became a thing. Something that countries went back and passed legislation and dedicated services as well as resources to fight. It was because of the fight of the African women in Beijing that FGM became an African thing that is now being fought everywhere. Because at that time, it almost felt like other people were fighting to end FGM in Africa, but Africa was not leading this fight. In Beijing, the African women turned that around. They took charge. In Beijing also, because the African women fought for the African child, the issue of incest in families was brought to the agenda. So we are not where we are, but these women like Mandisa, the many other Mandisas around the continent and the globe, have helped us to take some big steps forward. In Beijing, the women fought to define consent. Because just like domestic violence was supposed to be something that was private, many governments at that time did not even have legislation that criminalizes domestic violence because this is a private matter. In fact, that was the time when even public institutions used the terminology, and some of them still do now, like crime of passion, just to define murder, basically. But the women fought to say this is a crime, this is not a family matter. This is a crime to be prosecuted. When it happens to boys in the Catholic Church, this is not a sin to be forgiven. This is a crime to be prosecuted. Consent matters. And because of that fight of these women that Ilitha Labantu has walked alongside in the last 13 years, Me Too was a success. Because Me Too could never have been such an impactful movement if consent had not been defined in law. But even with all of this, we're not there yet. But we must make sure that we recognize the history and where we're coming from so that we can build stronger as we move forward. It's not enough, obviously, in a country like ours to have a constitution that is based on human rights. The rights must be realized. Our responsibility is to work alongside government institutions in order to make sure that we identify the gaps that create the erosion of these rights and help to close those gaps. Sometimes to fight with the authorities, but sometimes to walk alongside with the authorities and to help. And the nice thing I like about civil society, by and large, is that people do not fight for the sake of fighting. They fight to highlight the problem. But where you can collaborate, where you can support, where you can collaborate, that's what you do. And in the era of Beijing 25, when we know so much about what needs to be done, I think we have a lot to contribute in supporting our public institution to do the right thing, and we must make ourselves available for that. We know that it's never been more important to foster an enabling environment for gender equality, because right now there's actually a pushback against gender equality, even from civil society that is right-wing, which has been bolstered by the fact that people in very high places these days are also fighting against women's rights. When leaders of nations fight against women's rights, you give permission to misogynists to thrive. And they even come to the United Nations to fight for this agenda of theirs, which is against the rights that the United Nations was created to protect. We have to push back against the pushback, and it is everywhere. Our world has never seen such constraint on our multiple and interconnected societies. And we have many intersectional challenges that we need to fight all at the same time. So as the women's movement and activists, we do not have the luxury of being fragmented. We have to fight against gender-based violence, just as we fight against the denial of sexual rights, of sexual reproductive and health rights. We have to fight for unequal pay at the same time. We have to fight at the same time for human trafficking and the re-emergence of slavery. We have to fight for climate justice. We have to fight against homophobia, because to be a feminist means that you live intersectionality. You can't be a feminist and be homophobic. You can't be a feminist and be a climate denialist. You can't be a feminist and be racist. You can't be a feminist and not know how to support children of all sorts, of all abilities. A feminist is a rounded person who fights for humanity. So if sometimes people are ambiguous about the definition of a feminist, just recite. I am a feminist because I'm not homophobic. I am a feminist because I fight for climate justice. I am a feminist because I don't accept inequality. I am a feminist because I reject gender-based violence, whether it happens to women or men. Yes. I am a feminist because I want a world that is free of violence. Wow. That's not a bad description. So, just as we highlight the problems that we are facing, I also think that it's important that we recognize that never before has there been so many people who are mobilized to fight for justice. And this has happened because many women have come forward and have articulated the issues of women. You have so many young people starting at the age of 10. They are already activists and changing the world. You know, you look at the young climate activist, Greta. The child is changing the world. You look at young children in Kenya who are fighting for their own peers to stop child marriage. Children fighting for children. You have children publishing books about deep subjects. So as much as we face difficulties, we must also celebrate the fact that we have so many people who are mobilized, and the fact that the girls are really taking the center stage and making the change. Here in South Africa also, we have seen many young people also coming to the front and standing for the issues that are significant in our society. It is also important to recognize the important role of autonomous feminist organizations, because they are critical actors for advancing gender equality. There isn't a single country that has advanced in gender equality without a strong women's movement. A strong women's movement and a strong civil society is a precondition for progress in a country that is able to respect rights of men, women, and people in their diversity. The work of civil society remains just as important as the role and the work of policymakers. So it is important that we continue to support and to celebrate civil society. And that is why today we celebrate Ilitha, because we recognize this unique role that civil society plays in society. Recently in South Africa, we saw how the Total Shutdown campaign in 2018 forced the leaders to come to the table and to grapple with the reality of the country. And many of you had been working, writing memos, campaigning, but the coming together of civil society with clear demands helped to move the needle forward. And this is where we are then able to work in partnership with public institutions, with the leadership such as the president, with ministers, and all of those that care about the issues. But we want to see results. It's not enough to come together and have a warm feeling. We need to see results, and our responsibility is to accompany the process so that we can see results. And I am glad that my own team, the United Nations system, UN Women, are also part of the process of accompanying the implementation of the emergency plan, which is so much needed, because it gives us time frames within which to focus on specific aspects of gender-based violence that are unique to some extent to South Africa. We have to address the issue of cases, the backlog of cases that are unresolved. We have to address the issue of having a credible sex offenders register. We have to address the issue of the training of the police and making sure that there's a stronger gender lens in the manner in which they deal with issues. We have to address the issue of the strengthening of our Tutuzela centers in order to make sure that when women and children have to go and report, they find a place that treats them with dignity. We have to address also, together with government, a collaborative effort where prosecution, police, social services, civil society, legal services all work together in order to get results. And as I said earlier on, that is where Ilitha Labantu started. One of the success factors of Ilitha Labantu has been this coordinated effort. I told you, Ilitha Labantu worked with the police before the end of apartheid, when it was not fashionable to work with the police, but you needed that in order to get results. Ilitha Labantu worked with the churches when at that time we thought the churches were reactionary, because it was important to work with them to get results. At a global level, the same formula is actually quite important for us to push forward on these big issues, you need all the stakeholders to work together and to push forward together. We are also concerned that in most of the work that we have to do for women, and in what came out of Beijing, we did not have an investment plan. One of the challenges that we faced with Beijing was that we had a comprehensive agreement, just like we had with the MDGs and with the SDGs, but ayikho indaba. What we are now wanting to make sure we don't repeat as we mark Beijing 25 is to end up with a commemoration, with a consensus, and no investment plan and a roadmap. We don't want to commemorate Beijing 25 and come without a platform that brings us together with identified issues that we have to take forward. And in order to do this, we have therefore decided that we will convene what we are calling action coalitions. Yes, we will celebrate the progress because, as I said earlier on, despite the fact that we have not succeeded in everything we want to do, we have to mark and succeed the progress that we have made. But it's not good enough to celebrate. What we want to do when we mark Beijing 25 is to identify the issues that are giving us the hardest time in moving forward. I can tell you from the reports that we've reviewed from all the countries that have done their own reviews of the 25 years, gender-based violence is one of the big issues. And no country is going to be able to fight it alone. So we want to create an action coalition to fight issues such as these issues that are like gender-based violence. But you cannot just come together, identify the problem, provide the data. You must have an investment plan, milestones, a clear path, because our aim is that by 2025, we must see significant shifts. We must see that these issues that are major barriers to gender equality are being addressed globally, and we have consolidated our efforts. We also want to make sure in these action coalitions that we bring together the investors. We want to make sure that men with privilege and power pay in a nice way, because they also need a world that is gender equal for the economies of the world to thrive. We are partnering with philanthropists who also understand the importance of this issue, so that also working together and in partnership with them, we can mobilize resources for these big issues that must be moved forward. So when we look at an issue, we should be able to say, to turn around the issue, for instance, of child marriage. This is how far we've come. These are the promising trends and lessons. This is who is being left behind. This is how much it's going to cost us in order to make sure that we address this issue universally. Because in the Sustainable Development Goals, we talk about leaving no one behind. If we say we need to address child marriage that affects 200 million children, but we'll only come up with an intervention that is only targeted to 10 million children, siyadlala. We need to turn the situation around, and therefore we need a mechanism to address these issues in the shortest possible time, because every time we move slowly with the implementation of changes that are targeted to gender equality, we risk pulling back. We lose time, we lose momentum, and we lose the gains that we have already made. So the idea with the coalition is to intensify and to accelerate a push forward. What we hope to come out with, if you like, is a business plan of the world for fighting decisively for gender equality. And there should be a role for all of us working at a grassroots level, but we must maintain a bigger picture that changes the whole world. If patriarchy was made up of 12 pillars, the action coalitions must be the 6 pillars that we know are the ones that are really holding us down. And if we try to fight and target all the 12 pillars all at the same time, we become fragmented and our energy is not unified. What we want to do with the action coalitions is to say these are the 6 that we should all rally around, because we know when we shake these, the other 6 will also collapse. Or, put in another way, as my son, some of you know him because he used to babysit him, Uliolo once said to me, Mama, do you know that in China, because the population is so high, if everyone were to jump at the same time, there would be an earthquake because there would be too many people suspended in the air and the earth will not be able to. We need to jump at the same time and create an earthquake. This is what we want to do with the Action Coalition and crumble patriarchy into the pieces that can never be put back again. Because the truth of the matter is that we will not be able to win against gender-based violence if the whole ecosystem has not been addressed with the same intensity. Because gender-based violence is a product of an environment that works against women. So we have to work in all these areas. I am glad to say that we have, and I'm lobbying you to share this view, to make sure that we're speaking not necessarily in agreement on everything, but that we're facing the same direction and we bring young people in what can only succeed if it's intergenerational, because the size of the population of young people today and the intellect and the strength they bring in is critical for us to succeed. So this campaign for Beijing 25, which we are going to drive under a theme, Generation Equality, captures the fact that we recognize the strength of young people, but we want to drive forward in an intergenerational manner. With the young people at the center, but with everybody else, everybody, with everybody being part of it. The most important thing is that the change we will bring about must have an impact. We have partnered and we are being supported in this thought process, not only by civil society who are owning this, because this is a civil society made process. We have France and Mexico as the 2 countries that have offered to host us to drive this, and we have been supported by very generous and dedicated support of the Gates Foundation, who know how to pull forward. Oh, you are here. Thank you so much. They are supporting us to do this in a manner that will be destiny changing. Because if in 1976 in Soweto, the young people here created a change of gears that changed the momentum of the struggle. That is what we want to create next year. And we are counting on you in your own big and small way. We need to make sure that from 2020 to 2025, every year when we're at CSW, we are counting the impacts that we're making on the pillars of patriarchy that are most stubborn. Amanda! Malbongwe!